This is African American History is American History. Welcome. I'm your host, Harlan Kearsley. This program's goal is to foster understanding, promote discussion, and expand knowledge through stories of historical events, bios of unsung heroes, as well as timely and relevant news stories which hopefully will paint a vivid picture of the effects of segregation, discrimination, and bigotry on the lives of both blacks and whites. Comparisons will be made between the many racially fractured periods of American history and what's going on right now.
Many historians regard 1968 as the turning point for African Americans and the civil rights movement. When the dismantling of the Jim Crow segregation laws in 1965 didn't bring the equality and justice everyone hoped for, it was the young blacks that stepped up with renewed activism. The perseverance and organizational strength of the Black Power movement inspired and encouraged not only young African Americans, but whites, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, women, and the LGBTQ community. The counterculture revolution had begun.
The convergence of worldwide social justice conditions made 1968 a perfect storm for protests. On January 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive was launched. It was a major escalation by the forces of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese People's Army of Vietnam against the forces of the South Vietnamese Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the United States Armed Forces, and their allies. The impact of this brutal escalation, which was being presented nightly on network news stations here in America, sparked a broad opposition movement to the Vietnam War. Mass protest movements dominated by students were quickly growing all over the United States, as well as in London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, and Japan.
This is African American History is American History.
Do they know about Martin Luther King? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm only going to talk to you just for a minute or so this evening because I have some very sad news for all of you. Could you lower those signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks, and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
On April 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, an assassin's bullet stole the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Waves of shock, grief, and later rage followed. Many journalists at the time wrote that Dr. King's death also marked the death of the civil rights movement. But they were wrong. It was resurrected stronger than ever. To put it in today's terms, you might call it Civil Rights 2.0.
In May of 1968, 7 weeks of civil unrest took place in France. Student protesters took to the streets against capitalism, consumerism, American imperialism, and traditional institutions.
This has been African American History is American History. The episode you've been listening to, 1968, A Year of Activism, Part 1, was written and directed by Harlan Kearsley. The co-narrator for this two-part episode is Kim Bay.
I'm Kim Bay.
And I'm Harlan Kearsley. On behalf of everyone involved with African American History is American History, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy this series, please like and subscribe. It's free, and once you do, you'll be notified as soon as new episodes are posted. So, stay safe and stay tuned for part 2 of 1968, A Year of Activism. Thanks again. African American History is American History. Copyright H.C. Kearsley, 2021.